Right.
जी sir.
So welcome to this lecture on African literature. Now we are going to talk about, to begin with, one of the most important members of the African literature group, Chinua Achebe and his Things Fall Apart. The things to remember, I mean, you may remember that one question was asked about the parts, the name of the parts, right? So then,
Hmm.
one is, to which community does he belong? So it is Igbo community. He belongs to the
Is
Igbo
yeah.
community. And he was born in the Igbo town of Ogidi in Nigeria. Then he worked for the Nigerian Broadcasting Service at Lagos. His African trilogy is very famous. That is Things Fall Apart, No Longer at Ease, and Arrow of
God.
God. So you need to remember the African trilogy, Things Fall Apart, No Longer at Ease, and Arrow of God. There is Antilles of Savannah also, that's very famous, but it's not in the trilogy. Uh, he is the man, and there is a contextual information that in 1975 uh, raised a finger towards Conrad's Heart of Darkness as a symbol of racism. So, and that became very controversial also at the same time. So Things Fall Apart, the name itself comes from a very famous poem of W.B. Yeats's,
Yes.
and it was published in 1958. It was his debut novel. 25 chapters, omniscient third-person narrator. It's about pre-colonial southeastern Nigeria, and it's about the arrival of the Europeans in that Nigeria. So it's also called, the point to be noted, the archetypal modern African novel. In UK, it was published in 1962 by Heenan Man in the African Writers series. This is also important, Heenan Man in the African Writers series. So when you make a part-wise summary, you have to remember to take the names of important characters, to begin with Okonuwo of village Umuofia, who is a famous wrestler, local wrestler, and also a very important person in the village community, a village leader. You will also have to remember the name of Ikemefuna, the peace hostage that he later murders, although unwillingly, but then it's a sacrifice, literally a sacrifice that he has to make. And that traumatizes his whole family, especially his son. Now there is one Izendu. Izendu is a very important character also, because it is in his funeral that Okonwo accidentally kills his son and then is exiled for 7 years to Mobanta. And it is about this exile that this second part is all about. While he is away from Umofia, white man reaches there, and his son Noe is introduced to Christianity too. Then when he returns, that is part 3. Part 3 is how he returns and finds his village changed, people converted, people so changed that even when the village is insulted, they are not ready to go violent. That was his code. Although he goes violent, does the beheading, finally is wanted by law and commits suicide. Instead of getting caught and getting disgraced, he commits the maximum possible disgrace to him and his family, that is a suicide. Now Obirika is the name of his friend, who is the voice of reason in this novel. And the novel ends with the commissioner deciding to give one paragraph to Okonwo incident in his book. And the name of the book is The Pacification of the Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger. So this is the general, in a nutshell kind of idea of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. I suggest that you go for a really detailed summary.
Yes.
Then we come to David Mandesi Diop. Now he was a French West African poet, a part of the Negritude movement. I suggest that you make a short note on this Negritude movement, because it will work for post-colonial literary theory also, and in case of African literature also. So if you make, the question has not been asked, but I do suspect that they may ask something about members of the Negritude movements, about the main ideas or movements in the within the Negritude movement, so on and so forth. So it's a good thing to make a few short notes upon important movements, including this one. So his
Yes,
stance is anti-colonial. The name of his only poetry book is, it was published in French in 1956, Coup de Pilon, and in 1975 in English, Hammer Blows. Who is the strike or blow, and Pilon is hammer, so hammer blows. He died, unfortunately. He died young in an plane crash. He was born in
yes,
1927 and he died in 1960, and there was, a tragedy, very much uh, that shook the whole literary world back then. He was a son to a Senegalese father and a Cameroonian mother, and his poem Africa, My Africa, is a very important poem. 22 lines, unrhymed, question in 14 lines, 8 lines reply. So in a way, it parallels the structure of a sonnet, although the number of lines is not the number of lines in a sonnet. But that is a kind of structure, question answer kind of pattern. I suggest that you read the poem in full because they ask from within the poem. And it's a very optimistic poem. It begins with questioning, yes, the questioning of the young generation, but that it ends with the kind of hope of Africa springing up anew. So that's about David Mandesi Diop. Then we have got Gabriel Imomoti Timi Okara, who was born in 1921, died in 2019, very close to now. He was a Nigerian, first Anglophone modernist, as you can see here. And of course, as I said, negritude is important. So he was a Nigerian negritudist. He translated from his language also. And in his novel, The Voice, there are sections of translations from Ijo. We have in our syllabus The Mystic Drum. It's a very wonderful symbolic poem, a long poem of 41 lines, unrhymed 41 lines. The refrain, but standing behind a tree, and in the refrain, he is talking about a woman, a very mysterious kind of a woman who stays aloof from the African people, from the African culture, from the mystic drum, and so on and so forth. Now, due to this contrast with the mystic part, with the spiritual part, and because of the aloofness, she has been symbolically linked with Western imperialism and its probable distancing and whatever it did later and through the process to the African nations. Then we'll talk about Dennis Vincent Brutus, 1924-2009. He was a South African activist. He was responsible for getting South Africa banned from the Olympics. So that's a big thing. A Common Hate Enriched Our Love for Us is a 14 lines poem. Lines are grouped variously. It's an anti-apartheid poem that shows racial conflict, but black people coming together and rising in protest and their common hatred giving them courage. It's a poem full of rage also. So much of rage that hate gouged out deeper levels for our passions, a common hatred. And it posits black as beautiful. The timing of this poem links it with the Black Pride movement and the Black Panther movement in the United States that also affected the whole world. So this is also a very important poem and a very important poet. Then we come to Wole Soyinka, again a very important person because of his Nobel in 1986. His full name is Akunwande Oluwole Babatunde Soyinka. That's a long name. He was born in 1934. Wole Soyinka is the general name that we know him by. He's a Nigerian playwright and was the first sub-Saharan to get the Nobel in 1986. He portrays the Yoruba struggle for independence from the English people. He's the Lion and the Jewel. He's a 1959 play that was published in 1962 from Oxford University Press. I do remember they had asked about the names of the parts of this play in 50. Am I right, ma'am? Do you also remember that question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
They asked about the theme of Things Fall Apart, and they asked about the parts of this play. So you know, Shoinka and Achebe both are very important. And of course, the parts morning, noon, and night, they happen to be important per se. I mean, even if you are preparing only a summary, you will still write the names of the parts, just like the
Yes,
names
sir.
of the parts in uh, A Passage to India, Forster's A Passage to
Yeah.
India. The names of the part in this novel are also very, very important.
Important.
Now, the character of Baroka is a very interesting character. Uh, he is not your average old man. He does not accept to be molded into the role of an old man, the senile man. He is a very young, at heart kind of, and a very vitality, full of vitality kind of old man. And Lakunle, who is comparatively 30 years younger to Baroka, is a westernized
Mhm.
teacher, and he is actually, as far as vitality, as far as life is concerned, he is the old man in this play. And that is the final decision, that Siddhi, the jewel, and Baroka happens to be the lion. So Siddhi, the jewel of the most beautiful girl of the village, she decides to go with
With
the
Baroka.
so-called old man instead of going with
Mhm.
this young man.
Yep.
So that's probably a judgment. And Siddhi stands for much, much more than just a village girl. Maybe it's the judgment of the whole uh, Nigerian civilization or African civilization against the Western civilization and its open armed embrace of its Nigerianness, of its traditional intelligence, cunning, whatever you want to say. So Baroka is much more than a person, and Siddhi is much more than a person, and Lapunle is much more than a person. They are all symbolic also to a huge extent. So this story runs at two levels. One is the surface level, of course. There is a man who wants a woman, and there is a triangle, another man who wants a woman, so on and so forth. But there is much more than that going into the story. And knowing Woli Shoinka, yes, suspecting a symbolic undercurrent is quite valid. So this was all about uh, Woli Shoinka. There is a rapid modernization of Africa. There is a marginalization and objectification of women. Song and
Mm.
dance are used to spread information, and it is also related to the origin of theater. And finally, we reach Nadine Gordimer, who is a very famous novelist, a Nobel awardee in 1991. But we have her English language, literature, and politics in South Africa in our syllabus that was read as a paper in 1975 at a York conference. So it, as the title suggests, it is about English language, literature, and politics in South Africa, and it does not contradict this title. It totally agrees with the title that the very coming of language and the very coming of even writing script, they were very much political processes. Censorship, a very much politically motivated process. Religion, that in a way was intermingled with the coming of literacy, because the missionaries brought both education and the Bible to them, and the missionaries came with the people who wanted to control their land, to exploit their land. So it was a kind of heady mixture of all these kind of things: religion, politics, education, and everything is politics, including language in South Africa. So thank you for being with me up to now. Hope you find this useful. I could
Yes,
not
sir.
ask questions today, but then many questions can be made from out of what we have been doing till now. If you have any question, you may ask.
Yes, sir.
I'll share this
So,
this video, of course.